A big interview. Joining us now is Maggie Oliver, a former detective constable with Greater Manchester Police, who became a prominent whistleblower after exposing her own forces' failure to properly investigate the Rochdale grooming gang scandal. Maggie resigned from the police in protest and has since become a tireless advocate for the survivors of sexual abuse, and of course has founded the Maggie Oliver Foundation to support victims and campaign for change. Maggie, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you. Of course, your words are splashed all over the Daily Mail today. You claim Keir Starmer is as guilty as anybody. And I know our audience really want to know from your perspective, how have you come to that conclusion?
Hello, Alex, and thank you for inviting me on the show. Let me say, first of all, I didn't expect that to be on the front page of the Daily Mail. It was something that I said on my Twitter, but I do stand by every word. This topic has haunted me for really 20 years now, since I first worked on Operation Augusta. Now, in 2000, I was very naive back then, but in 2005, Greater Manchester Police closed down a live investigation where we had 100 paedophiles on a database that we knew were abusing dozens of children. My husband was terminally ill, and I went off work, leaving a fully, all singing, all dancing, live major investigation. And when I came back to work after he died, the whole job had been closed down. Not one person prosecuted, and it left me traumatized. But I was very, very naive in that back then. I am not naive now. I've had 20 years of learning. But in 2008, I know that when Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions, Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister, and a circular was sent out to all Crown prosecutors and police forces, telling them that this was a well-known problem amongst the Pakistani Muslim community, that young white children were being groomed or and raped on a daily basis, and that they should do nothing about it. So if the and yet we're talking about 11, 12, 13-year-old white vulnerable children, often from difficult backgrounds, and the law in our country says you cannot have sex with a 12-year-old child. And if the Director of Public Prosecutions is instructing police forces and Crown prosecutors not to prosecute, I say there is no higher authority in the land. He should be leading by example. And we don't cherry pick which rapists we prosecute. You know, I don't care where an abuser comes from. It just so happens that this kind of abuse has landed on my doorstep. But I don't care if it's a priest in the church, if it's the Church of England, if it's Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein. I honestly do not care who that abuser is. The law should be equal. So I now see the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, saying that, turning away again. I'm not saying he is the only one, Alex. We have had a whole army of public figures who have failed in their public duty to prosecute child abusers. And that is a fact. And I don't, using a fear of racial tension as a reason not to prosecute is not good enough. We have thousands and thousands of children, many of whom we are supporting in my charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, who have fought for 20 years to have their abusers prosecuted. We, as a country, need to get a grip of this and do something properly about it to stop it. And the responsibility and the blame, Alex, does not lie with those children. It lies with the perpetrators. And our focus as a civilized society is to address that abuse. So that's why I've said what I've said. Yeah,
Maggie, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm, thankful for the work that you do, and I know our audience will be very, very supportive of you. But, there's been lots of calls internationally. We've had Elon Musk, of course, tweeting about this. We've had people from America, senators from New Zealand, lots of things going on around this issue. Many of them are calling for people in positions of power today and people who work in our civil service and who have worked in our civil service to either be jailed or banned for their negligence or their role in covering up the scandal. Do you agree with them?
I would absolutely agree with that. And I've been calling for that for years. I mean, this is like an onion. I've got maybe 10 minutes here to talk about something that I could talk about all week. But you peel back one layer and there is another layer underneath it. And when you ask that, I will give an example of a case, the Augusta case that I was just talking about in 2005. I worked on the drama Three Girls, and after it, I did a lot of media. I worked on it for 4 years. And Andy Burnham in Manchester, I'm sure he did hear me talking, and he set up some independent reviews, local reviews, one of which looked into that case, Operation Augusta. Now, that I worked with that review team for 6 years, and in 2020, they formally reported that when Greater Manchester closed that case down in 2005, they closed it because they were not willing to put the resources in. Even though we had 100 paedophiles, over 3 dozen children, now we know it was nearly 100 children, but they knowingly, deliberately, and I would say criminally closed down that case. After that independent review was published, 5 of those senior officers who made that decision in that Gold Command Group meeting were referred to the IOPC. Every one of those 5 senior officers refused to be interviewed, and there was no obligation for them to be interviewed. The minutes of the meeting where that decision was made were quite conveniently lost, and all 5 of them walked away scot-free. For me, they are guilty of gross criminal neglect, misconduct in a public office. And if we are not going to hold senior officials to account when they fail in their public duty, then what's it all about? If I went and stole a dress from Rackham's or Kendall's, I would be in front of a court. And yet these public figures are paid to protect children. Why is it that we do not hold them criminally accountable when they fail so monumentally in their duty to protect? They are criminalizing victims for putting something on Facebook, but they themselves seem to be above the law. And that's why we have so many angry people in our country. We're not far-right extremists. I am an honest, decent, ordinary woman who gave 16 years of my life to the police because I believe in justice. I believe we don't rape 12-year-old children. And I was almost destroyed by what I saw. So now it is my duty to, speak about what I know. It's a scary road to be on sometimes, but if I find it scary, what about all the victims, all the children, all the survivors who have been completely squashed and destroyed by the failures that they have been subjected to?
Yeah, I mean, the CPS, in my opinion, Maggie, has a lot to answer for. And I think even if you've sort of didn't know it was happening in your department, the buck stops with you at the end of the day. That's my opinion. But I want to bring in Dr. Renee on our panel now to ask you some questions as well, please, Dr.
Hello,
Renee.
Maggie. Maggie and I have to say thank you for all the work that you do and continue to do. For me, the big issue here is that we have to get justice for the girls that have been raped, but also what worries me, and from chats that you and I have had in the past, is that this is still going on today. I've said to people, and they've shouted me down, that this is going on in almost every big town and city in our country. Would you agree with that?
Hi, Renee. I absolutely would agree with it. And you know that I started my own charity from a standing start, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, because I recognised that there were so many thousands of desperate victims out there who had nowhere to go. Now, I've now got a fantastic team of almost 40 people. Many of those are survivors, and we offer emotional support, but legal advocacy, fighting alongside somebody who is being silenced by the system. We are not funded publicly, so anybody who wants to support a little charity making a big difference, please come to us. But I feel that the responsibility, Renee, there are 2 sides of it. There is the responsibility to help the victims, but there is also a responsibility to push for change. Actually, I've lost my thread. What did you ask me?
Whether or not you think this is still going on today as we sit here.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that, so I'm talking to you about cases that are very well developed because the public know about them. But we are dealing with cases today that are still being not dealt with as well as they can. But what I would have to say is that in the foundation, we are building some bridges with good people who are in certain police forces, with good people who feel like me that we need change. This is not directed at them. This is directed at the system, which is being controlled with different agendas by people at the top. And I want to see those people held accountable, not a detective who is, carrying an inhumane crime queue, and they are the ones that carry the can when something goes wrong, because our public services are on their knees, and that includes the police, it includes the Crown Prosecution Service, it does include social services, but somebody has to take responsibility for it. And for me, that's
Maggie,
those
I wanted to ask you, how is this disproportionately affecting poor girls or white girls? I know you've said that earlier and especially in the care system. I know you were talking about that in your opening statement to us, but I know the audience really want to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that we all know that abuse happens everywhere. It happens in the home, it happens in schools, it happens in football. Wherever you have children, you have predators. But with this particular problem, it's undeniable that the ethnicity of the offenders has played into the unwillingness to tackle the problem. And even today, I have seen so many people trying to say that this is an unfair argument. It isn't unfair. It's true. It's factual. And yet the statistics that are gathered by the authorities don't gather ethnicity. They don't gather.
On that point, Maggie, is that a Labour-specific thing? Because we know, obviously, many Labour councils covered up.
No, the authorities just do not gather those facts. And, my belief is that the reason they don't gather those facts is because they know full well what those figures will show. And so it's another way of muddying the waters. But it's my duty to say that what I see in the many cases that I have been involved in of this particular kind of child abuse is that the vast majority of those abusers in those grooming gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them, are predominantly Pakistani Muslim men, but they are almost all exclusively of a Muslim background.
Yeah.
And that's because they believe that a child who is not within their religion, who is very young, is really fair game for them because they're not in the same religion. And we need to get a grip of this.
Maggie, I wanted to bring in Adam. He had a question for you as well, but it was quite quick because we've only got a minute left.
Hi, Maggie. You're a true hero, and I want to thank you for all the work you do, and I hope Elon Musk shines a light on your campaigning too. Maggie, there are different estimates of the amount of victims that could have been affected by this. Some range up to hundreds of thousands of young girls. Do you think that's true?
I mean, obviously, I'm speculating, but when I look at the number of cases that I personally have been involved in and know about, and I know that this goes back perhaps 30 years or even 40 years, Anne Cryer was shouting out about this in the late 70s, I would say that that is a fair estimate of what's happening. And it hasn't gone away. I do think we've got more public awareness now. I do think that police forces now are having to deal with these cases, but I still believe we have a long way to go in tackling it properly. And some of that is down to resources, but a lot of it is down to prioritising these cases, putting the resources in that are needed, and chief constables and senior prosecutors and social workers saying to government, we need more money. They find the money to send to wherever, Ukraine or all over the world. We are struggling in our country. Our public services are on their knees. And in this particular kind of crime, we have children's lives being destroyed for decades. They come to the foundation to try to recover because there's no help there for them, no victim care, no counselling, nothing. They are thrown on a scrap heap and just left to their own devices to recover. And that is criminal on every single level. And I will say that until there is no more breath in my body because it's the truth.
Maggie, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight. A lot of our viewers are saying you deserve a damehood. I couldn't agree more with them. You really do. You're someone we would love to have in the House of Lords and be rewarded for the hard work you do. Thank you for joining us tonight, Maggie. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said this evening that Jess Phillips has dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse. From setting up the first ever child sexual exploitation service in the Black Country and supporting survivors in Telford, Jess has been a fearless and formidable advocate for victims and survivors. She has worked with whistleblowers and campaigned tirelessly for justice and for those badly let down by endemic institutional failure. As a Home Office Minister, she has put the experience of grooming and trafficking victims at the heart of our work on modern slavery and launched a national scheme to make sure staff and local police work together to spot when hotels are being used as a spite of child sexual exploitation.